There are different, there's simple virtues. Like, for example, with a knife, the virtue is to be sharp. With, a cup, your virtue is to hold liquid. Maybe with a coffee cup, which is what this is, the virtue is to keep the coffee warm or things like that. But those are all fairly simple virtues. But with people, it becomes more complex. Even with certain objects, the virtue and how it works is, well, somewhat simple. Like a refrigerator's virtue is to cool food. A a a stove's virtue is to heat and cook food, or a stove top. But some people will say like the like a gas fire or a gas stove is more virtuous than a electric range, because the gas range will allow you to heat up things quicker and cool them down quicker, and so you're able to have better control of your temperature. And some people say that's better, and some people say, well, no, the electric range is better because it's more virtuous because once it reaches heat, it maintains the heat much longer, and you can turn off the thing and you can continue to let it cook for a while. It just takes a different style of cooking. And so what happens is there may be debate about what makes which stove top the most virtuous. Well, this can come back to humans, because humans are like stoves. I mean, they're not so simple as to say like it just has to be sharp. What is virtuous for one group of people, what they would consider virtuous, may be different from what another group considers virtuous. For example, in the Greek from which this came, for the Greeks from which this came, they had virtues, for example, like being a warrior, being a good politician, being strong, and being capable, and very very traditional masculine virtues for men, very traditional virtues for women, and they were very much focused on war and politics and things like that. Whereas, maybe later periods of time, the virtues for men or for women are more similar. And maybe, for example, the virtues are more about caring and compassion, love and giving, versus, being able to smite your enemies. And so the whole point of this is that the virtue from one stage to the next can vary. That what you consider virtuous, what you consider virtuous may in fact be different than what another group. For the Greeks, they were more traditional. For the Christians, for example, they had a set of virtues that was very different. Their virtues are love, charity, caring, things like that. And they have a very different set of virtues. And so what you consider virtuous is something to debate. But the point is it's all has to do with what your function or purpose is. It's just some people think that people should be giving and caring and loving, and some people would say your goal as a human should be to control things and to have power and to reach greatness. And so these virtues can vary from person to person and tradition to tradition. They can be very subjective. Now we can turn back to the Christian virtues. The Christian virtues were love, charity. They're the seven, virtues of Christianity. Love, charity, faith, hope. I mean, these are all kind of traditional virtues. But then they also have vices. And the vices are also what we know as the seven deadly sins. The seven deadly sins are things like sloth or laziness, envy, lust, gluttony, eating too much, greed. And so, envy, greed, gluttony, sloth, I have to think of them all. Usually the way I think of it is I think of that movie Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, and the way he kills the people in that movie in order to remember what my vices are. But those are your vices in Christianity. And the idea is they're just like the Greek system. The virtues are the things you strive for, and the vices are the things you want to avoid, like envy and lust and gluttony and sloth and pride and lust and whatever. And so these are basically the same system. That is part of the medieval virtue system for the Christians. They adapted this, and they would say what you want to do is become a person who demonstrates love, who demonstrates hope, who demonstrates faith. And you try to make decisions that do those. And you want to move away from and choose actions that will move you away from being the kind of person that would be vice-filled, such as a gluttonous person or a lustful person or an envious person. And so it all comes back to that same concept of virtue ethics.